Boris was great at it.
Exactly that.
Like that
exactly
blue
that.
passport.
Yeah,
brilliant.
blue.
Love that video. Everyone talks about that.
That's still, to be fair, that's still a gif on my phone on WhatsApp. It's just like said it blue.
No, exactly. And like all my friends always talk about like whenever like I just went travelling recently and I had my passport. And every time my friend would see it, they'd be like blue.
Yeah,
like, do you know what I mean?
absolutely.
Like Boris was great at it, and I think having a personality spearheading your party is actually really helpful and really good.
I'm Ben Hewertson. This is the Blueprint Podcast, brought to you by Conservative Home, and we're going to lift the lid on centre-right politics in the UK. We're going to be speaking with influential figures from across the political spectrum to help understand how we can make centre-right politics relevant to people's lives again and turn it back into a political force for good. Hi everyone, welcome to another episode of the Blueprint Podcast. Today we've actually shifted gear a little bit. It's a new one for me. We've got Emily Hewertson, a political influencer. I know you've been referred to this as a political influencer before, Emily. Usually we have stuffy old politicians, but we thought we'd change gears. So thank you very much for joining us on the Blueprint Podcast.
Thank you for having me. I'm very excited.
So I know I've seen lots of your stuff pop up on social media, Instagram, Twitter. I mean, you're pretty prolific on all of the social media websites, and actually, I know you've done some other podcasts and things like that. Mm-hmm. But for listeners of the Blueprint Podcast who might not be familiar, do you want to tell people a little bit about your background, where you're from, where you grew up?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So I'm from Northamptonshire originally. I now live in London. Got to be in the heart of politics, you know. But I kind of. I guess I hate to use the phrase, but arose to fame. I don't know what else to describe it as, but after I went on Question Time in the audience, it was hosted actually at my old school by chance in Northamptonshire. So I attended that, and it was during the European elections when we were supposed to be out the EU, but we were still in it because there was a big mess with Theresa May. And when the panel got announced, so I couldn't believe my luck. We had Anna Soubry, Nigel Farage, Amber Rudd, kind of like the big Brexit dogs. Yeah. So
good arguments happening there.
Yeah, exactly. I was like, here we go. This is my time. And so I went into the audience. I luckily got a spot. Wow. And I put up my hand pretty much straight away because I was feeling quite angry at this point, as I'm sure many people were, about the hold up with Brexit. And I think because I was like a young female, people were expecting me to put up my hand and go on this kind of pro-Remain kind of tangent. But actually, when I put up my hand, I was basically saying that even though I'm a Conservative Party member, that I would be voting for the Brexit Party at the European elections. And obviously, I think Nigel had a nice little smirk about that. He was like, get in. I was worried that I might be kicked out of the Conservative Party.
It's like a planted question, just teeing Farage up for an answer.
Exactly. But I think, to be honest, at that point, the Conservative Party would have had to kick out a lot of members if they were going to go along that line. And then kind of from that, so
I vaguely remember that. Was that the first? So, because again, I don't know how to phrase this, but you seem to have been around a while. Like your name pops up, your photo pops up, like I say, videos and things pop up, and I kind of feel like thinking back to that clip. That didn't strike me as being the first time that you'd kind of raised your head and, Emily introduced herself to the world.
Yeah, no, exactly. You are right. And I was only 19 then, and I'm now 24. So it was actually quite a few years ago. Yeah, but it's funny because I still have people coming up saying that they remember that clip.
Do you?
So that's pretty.
So what happened immediately after that? So you finish the show and you think I've asked a great question and you feel better about yourself. So it sounds like that was kind of a big moment for you. Yeah.
So I kind of didn't really think that much of it afterwards because there's a slight delay between the episode being recorded and it being put out. I think it's like a 2-hour difference. So I kind of didn't think much of it, and then obviously it was time for Question Time. I just got home by this point from the recording.
Yeah, I suppose you can do it and then run home and watch
exactly.
it.
I was like, I'm not missing this. So all the family were gathered round. We put it on, and obviously, like, I had my beer, and I didn't think much of it. And then kind of went on Twitter, and I'd seen that they posted out this clip, and all the comments were like, "Who is this girl? Who is this girl?" So I was like, "Surprise! It's me!" And from that point, I just remember like refreshing my Twitter followers, and they were going up by like 1,000 every few minutes. Really? Or something crazy.
Oh wow!
Which I just wasn't expecting whatsoever. And
so what had happened? Had somebody online, I don't know, Nigel Farage or somebody online kind of tweeted a clip of you or tagged you? Or, I mean,
it was the BBC Question Time account.
Oh, right, had it? Okay.
I think this was really when Question Time was at the peak. I know that it's not as popular now.
Yeah, but particularly during kind of the whole Brexit wars thing.
Yeah, exactly.
Like I say, and particularly in that forum when you've got people like Amber Rudd and Farage having a bit of a ding-dong about it.
Exactly, it was a good one. So, yeah, I kind of replied to some of the comments about it, and then I think other people found me, and then there was some big account saying, "This is the girl," kind of like your Darren Grimes tagging me. So then I was like, "Thanks, guys." And then what was really weird is the next day, one story that I always remember, just to kind of emphasize how crazy this was, is that my younger sister, she would have been 15 at the time, was at school and she got a call. She answered it and they were like, "Hi, excuse me, do you know Emily Hewertson? This is the Daily Mail calling, or one of the other big newspapers." I don't even, clearly journalists have some great ways of
Was this just immediately afterwards then?
Yeah, and they were ringing my house phone.
I imagine you must have got a whole lot of DMs from all of the journalists as well.
Yeah, exactly. It really was a big snowball effect. But yeah, the fact that they managed to find my younger sister's phone call and call her while she was revising for her GCSE.
What did she say?
Crazy. I think she just hung up. So I was like,
I don't want to talk about
guys, I need to, because I didn't want to rush into it. It's very easy to kind of get swept up into these kind of things. And I literally remember on some of the newspapers, there was a big line saying, "Do you know Emily Hewertson? Please give us a ring if you do." And I was like, God, I was thinking of any bad stories, and, maybe when I'd got drunk before or something.
It's the nature of the media, I suppose, a little bit.
Exactly. But it was a crazy time, and I'm very grateful for the opportunity.
So did you not then, after that happened and then everything blew up in the couple of days afterwards, did you not then go and do all of the media when they contacted you? Or did you do bits and pieces? Or?
Yeah, I did bits and pieces. I was quite selective because I didn't.
Why was that? Why didn't you just think, this is great, yeah, I'll go on
I'd seen so
everything.
Many exactly. It was tempting, to be honest, but I'd seen how a lot of left-wing media kind of stitch people up, so I didn't want to kind of fall into that trap. And I was also conscious as well that a lot of the Daily Mail, they were using a lot of bikini pictures and that kind of thing to try and so I was just trying to take it all in, take it slow and not rush into it, because it would have been very easy. But I did some amazing things, I filmed a video about how party girls can do politics with the BBC, which I really like, because I think that's kind of been my thing, really. I want to make politics more appealing to young people. I remember when I was really young, politics was always sold as something that was quite boring, and I just don't think that is the case. And I think you can going out, unlike politics, the two definitely are mutually exclusive. So and then there was another time as well where I was getting ready for a night out, and I think it was the results of the European election, so it's kind of on brand. And I was watching them whilst I was
party.
Yeah, exactly. I was watching them whilst I was getting ready for the night out, and then watching them in the nightclub.
Oh, yeah.
I got one of my
friends.
Have
your phone out or Twitter online or something?
Yeah, exactly. So I got one of my friends to film that, slightly staged, I know. But I put that out, and then that kind of got another lot of attraction as well.
That's quite savvy though, because it's very easy. It would be very easy, like you say, one to kind of that happen to you and then think, I'm just going to go on everything, which can kind of be a flash in the pan thing, because it's one of those media things, isn't it? They've kind of used you up and it's okay, somebody else comes along and does something similar. But being quite reserved and picking and choosing what you do, and having taken yourself there from back in 2017, 2018, whatever it was, and building that kind of influencer profile that you've got. How is that a conscious effort that you've done that, or is that just something that's just happened and you've just kind of gone with it day by day? How does that?
I think I've kind of improved, because I think at the start I was kind of obsessed with clicks and trying to get a bit of a reaction if I'm being truthful. So there was times where I definitely said stuff that came across wrong online or whatever, and I think you just learn from those experiences. But I also a lot of people that had kind of been in a similar position also reached out to me and gave me some great advice. So that was really helpful as well. Because I think if I hadn't kind of had that advice, I probably would have gone more down the accepting everything, probably making some worse decisions. So I think it was really good to lean on other people that were kind of in another space, because none of my friends were really interested in politics. So it's definitely good to kind of use that network online.
Well, you do see it, that on both sides really, but I see it a little bit more on the left, but there are people on the right that do it, that you can see just use it. They kind of want to be that kind of shock jock type of personality, because they want to be invited on to, I don't know, whatever, the daily politics, etc. And they just want to say outrageous things because they think that's the thing that keeps them relevant. But
Exactly. But I think it just, like then you get a bit of a reputation for just saying like silly things.
So, it does pigeonhole you as well.
Exactly. Like there's pros and cons, but I've just kind of like try to actually say things that I believe in, whether they're popular or not. So
principles. I mean,
exactly, got to be done.
People should be more principled, and enough principles around these days. But so if you go back to when you were 19 and you were on that Question Time audience, was that just something you had an interest in, or were you already actively involved in politics? Or
I had been a Conservative Party member, but I wasn't, and I was slightly involved within my local association.
And when did you join the Conservative Party?
When I was 16, so quite young. But I actually kind of got interested in politics through school. It was kind of like a current affairs club. But it's funny actually because we've always discussed politics in my home. We're not one of those homes where, like politics is not to be spoken about. Yeah. We're very open. But everyone always says, oh, you must get your political opinions from your parents. But actually, little do people know, my dad's a massive lefty.
Is he?
He went on like the pro-Remain marches.
Is he a Corbyn supporter?
He
not that left.
Not that left, but I think he did reluctantly vote Corbyn.
Did he?
But that was even a bit far.
Must have been some discussions in the household about that.
Exactly. Christmas dinner's always very interesting.
Okay. What was his thought process behind? Like I say, I mean, there are a few people who are kind of hardcore Corbyn supporters, but
he definitely wasn't. It was just that he just didn't want the Conservatives to get in. So
right,
like, it's probably
within our area. Vote,
it was a bit of a tactical kind of vote, but he's a bit more of like a Blairite, I'd say.
And what about your mum?
She's actually a swing voter, so whatever she votes for tends to win.
Good bellwether.
Yeah, exactly. Like she voted for Brexit. But then she also voted for like Lib Dems in 2010. But then she's kind of voted for the Conservatives since. But then I think maybe this year she didn't vote.
All right. It's like a proper mini focus group of Emily's mum.
Exactly.
Like, what's Emily's mum going to do?
Yeah, exactly.
Go and put a tenner on at Ladbrokes. Well, we don't bet anymore, do we? But
no, definitely not.
So why is it then that you end up being a Conservative? You got a mother who's pretty middle ground, transactional, it sounds like, with the way that she votes, and a father who's kind of relatively left wing or certainly centre left. How did you end up being a 19-year-old Conservative Brexiteer?
Yeah, I know. It's a funny story. Really, just at school there was like when I was hearing the different arguments, it was always the Conservative ones that just made more sense to me. They were more logical, more rationale. So and also at the time I was quite socially liberal, and I saw what David Cameron was trying to do with the Conservative Party to make it more kind of socially liberal. So that definitely kind of like drew me in even more. And it just makes more sense, like things on the economy, I think like I prioritise as very important, and obviously the Conservatives are traditionally the best at managing the economy in my opinion.
When you talk about kind of being, are you still socially liberal, would you say?
I think less so. I think I've just I think because of the way that it's gone so far in some aspects, it pushes people away to the other kind of side. So
in what way? What do you mean?
So for example, on things like transgender rights, the kind of infringement into female only spaces has just kind of like really pushed me to the other side.
I suppose it's what you define as socially liberal, isn't it?
Yeah,
so
if you're
kind of classically liberal compared to kind of the new wave kind of cultural left, which is a whole new, well, it's not really a new beast, but it's certainly new in mainstream politics.
Exactly, and that's why labels aren't necessarily very helpful, because
they're not.
They can mean different things to different people. So yeah.
And I mean, not that you can be defined as the young voter, but when you look at your peers, you look at other people similar ages to you, your peer group and friends, etc. Do you find that you're an outlier in that group when it comes to those types of cultural issues? Are people actually quite supportive of them, or you find that actually the position's a bit more nuanced than that? Yeah,
that's the thing, because obviously typically a lot of people my age, they don't vote Conservative, but if you actually speak to them about those kind of issues, like about whether they think that transgender people should be allowed in women's spaces, what you actually find is that they just don't want to be labelled as a Tory or as a Conservative because of the stereotype and the reputation that it comes with. But actually we've seen reform do well amongst young people, and I think that kind of speaks to that, really, that people don't necessarily want to be labelled as Conservatives, but really at their core are quite socially conservative.
Why don't you think people want to be labelled as Conservatives?
I just think there's a bit of a stereotype. I mean, when you have so many people labelling all Conservatives as far right or as, you know, like racist, or that they don't care about poor people. I think when you hear that so many times, you start to maybe think, oh, I just don't want to be associated with that. But actually, what I'm trying to do, and what I think what a lot of people on the right are trying to do, is kind of like re-image ourselves, because that's just not the case at all. If you dig a bit deeper, you can actually see, you know, on so many of the issues, we're the one that have led the way, you know, female party leaders and
but if you were to, I don't want you to name and or shame anybody, but if you were to think of one of your friends, who I'm sure you've probably got left-wing friends, we all have people who you know, don't have the same political allegiances as do we, or we should. They don't want to identify as a conservative, but what in your mind, if you're thinking of that person, what in your mind thinks, well, actually you are a conservative, but there's a brand issue there for young people?
I think one of the things, and this is where the Conservatives have got really wrong, but they really want to own a home, and I think actually at the core, that kind of aspiration principle is very conservative. It's just that we haven't been very good at making enough homes so people can afford homes. But I think just like the whole idea of aspiration, that, you know, if you work hard you can achieve, that is very conservative, and you don't want to be relying on the state and things like that. And also, like, freedom is important, having a small state and things like that. And also, I just want to say as well, I think you pointed out a really good point, that yes, I do have friends on the left, and I think it's important that we all have friends from all over the political spectrum, because, you know, it's important to not live in an echo chamber. It's important to see that even if someone disagrees with me politically, actually we can get on as people, and we can kind of look past those political differences and still have a great friendship.
Well, a couple of things. So I had a few weeks ago, we had Kemi on, and the episode's online if anybody hasn't listened to it yet. And we also had Lee Rowley, who's now new chief of staff, who is obviously a campaign director, and I've known both of them for quite some time. And we had actually had, I'd be interested to get your reflections on this. We had a long conversation about, they're a little bit older than me, but it's the same thing, that when we were growing up, you went to school and you kind of just felt like, and I appreciate this isn't for everybody, but I would say the vast majority of Middle Britain in particular kind of felt like the world was their oyster. You kind of felt like, if I work hard, I can go to university, I can go and do an apprenticeship, I can go and, start my own business, I can do basically whatever I want if I work for it. I can go and do anything. I can go live in Europe, I can go live in America, whatever it might be. And there definitely does seem to be a sense and a feel that certainly if we look back at ourselves at that similar age of maybe 16 to 20, and I say this from the outside, so it'd be good to get your reflections, Emily, it kind of feels like there isn't that same optimism from young people. And it feels to me like housing is a bit of a lightning rod as a symptom of that, but it feels to me it's much greater than that. I mean, housing, people want to own their own home. It's a sense of autonomy, it's that freedom, it's that opportunity and aspiration. But actually it's much wider than that, isn't it? It's about job aspiration, it's about economic freedom, it's about the ability to have choice economically, to decide what you want to do, rather than, I grew up here, I don't have the ability, I don't have any money to go anywhere, jobs are quite scarce. It kind of feels to me we're at risk potentially of going into a generation of young people that feel like that aspiration isn't a thing for them.
No, absolutely. And I think it's true, there is the kind of this sense of impending doom. And I actually think...
Is that serious?
I actually, somewhat. I think it's important to try and get young people to look past that and kind of change the messaging and make it kind of what Kemi and Lee were talking about how the world should be your oyster. But I think, particularly at the moment, there's been, a lot of bad situations. I think COVID really affected young people, kind of the inability to go out and see their friends. I think that was very hard. It has been going on longer than that. And I think really the media have something to do with that. I feel like the media love a fear story. They love to, stoke up fear and a bit of negativity. And I think, people do start to feel that. And like it becomes a bit of like a worry about the future. Like if you think about the environment, for example, like there's so many young people that are genuinely scared that in 5 years the earth isn't going to exist anymore. And I think the way that the media kind of likes to conjure up fear and fearmonger on these issues does make people feel more miserable.
Do you think, I appreciate what you said about the media as well, but also I think particularly with young people, because of the way that they absorb any media, any sort of medium, actually product, it tends not to be through traditional media at all. I mean, most young people tend not really to watch TV, and if they do, it's on demand, so they're picking and choosing anyway, and it's through things like long form social media, YouTube, etc., etc. To what extent do you think social media has played a part in some of the real or perceived barriers that young people face? Because it kind of feels to me the creation of social media in and of itself is a very negative thing. Well, I think social media, to be frank, is a devil child. I think ultimately, I don't think it's a good and healthy thing for anybody. But it feels to me for young people, it prevents the ability to be exposed in a reasonable way to views that are not similar to their own, where they can have a sensible conversation about ideas, whereas social media by definition, and the algorithms on all social media platforms, reinforce people's behaviour types, reinforces, the types of things that will keep them watching a video for slightly longer, and that tends to reinforce echo chambers. How is anybody, whether it's the Conservative Party, Labour, or anybody, or actually society in general, supposed to try and break through that? To try and break down these, in effect, miniature groups of...
Yeah, no, completely. And you've seen Elon Musk recently kind of double down on free speech on X. But what you've actually seen as a fallout from that is a lot of people have said, actually, I don't want this free speech platform. I'm going to go and join this blue sky social to kind of reinforce and get into their safe little echo chamber again. I think you are right. Social media does play a part in how interactions are massively different. For example, in person, I rarely get kind of anybody come up to me and say something rude. People come up to me and politely disagree with me, how it used to be. But online, I think it puts up this barrier where people are just absolutely horrible just because they don't agree with you.
Yeah, definitely dehumanises people.
Yeah, absolutely. And it just changes the way that people interact. And I just find it so interesting that in person, I just don't get that response at all. And people are really welcoming of different views. But I think it's interesting. We really do need to push on this whole tolerance of things, because we've got tolerance in a lot of other aspects, but tolerance of different opinions politically just doesn't seem to be there. And it's the people that try and promote tolerance in terms of diversity that are actually the most intolerant when it comes to people they disagree with you. So I really think we need to kind of push out that it is fine to have different political opinions, and you can disagree with it in a polite, respectful way.
I mean, you've probably got examples. I have an example where I get it all the time. You get people online who are just absolutely vile and say some of the most horrendous things. And I know there's an example of a gentleman who I won't name. He's an elderly gentleman who was just abusive to me on a daily basis, would direct message me on Facebook, actually, just repeatedly every single day. And particularly as a politician, there's also a weird line that, do you just block them and think I don't need to put up with that? But then at the same time, as a politician, somebody's going to say, oh, well, you're not listening to a local constituent, etc. So I just kind of put up with it, didn't really respond to it, but just kind of every day I was getting these messages. And I kind of thought, this guy's, clearly going through something here. I remember a few weeks afterwards, it died down a little bit, and I bumped into him in the street. I had never met this man before, and he was actually married to my old dinner lady at secondary school. So she came up to me and was like, oh, Ben, good to see you. Oh, it's fantastic how well you're doing, and I voted for you. And her husband, who was the guy that was abusing me on the line, just stood there. Just didn't say anything.
Sorry.
And she didn't know what was going on. So he's clearly online at home, just being abusive to people. And so she's like, oh, such and such name. Come and say hi. Ben. He kind of came over and was like, oh, hi, Ben, and shook my hand and just didn't say anything. But again, online, some of the stuff that's coming out of his mouth, you could never repeat even on late night TV. I mean, it's strange how people perceive social media to be a different thing. And this is, not to be, disrespectful to, any teenager, but this is a guy in his 60s and 70s, right? I mean, you could argue, people of that generation don't necessarily appreciate the technology in the way that some of the younger generations do, even in their 30s and 40s. But, at the same time, when you've got young people who just grow up with social media in those bubbles, and there is that depersonalization that you're actually speaking to another human being on the end of that tweet or on that message, we're seeing it in Australia, aren't we, a bit, where the Australians are talking about banning all social media and stuff for under 16s. Is that something that, what would your views on beyond that? Does that get discussed in your circles?
It is. It's a hard one, because I do agree in kind of liberty and things, but really I'm not sure social media is the place for children. Especially there's some horrific people out there, and to expose that to children is way too much. You see quite young children getting TikTok, and some of the videos that are posted on there are clearly not suitable for a child. So I'd probably more lean towards, I actually do think that is a good idea, because at the end of the day, these are children. We want to protect the innocence of children. I feel like children in this day and age are growing up far too quickly. So I think it is a good idea, but then again, as a 15-year-old, I would have been pretty sad if I wasn't allowed my face.
Well, there's also the practicalities that, I mean, kids, these days, I mean, it's such a cliche thing. Oh, kids these days will get around anything. Well, to be fair, if you ban it, there are things like VPNs, etc. So how enforceable these types of things are. But I mean, you've been through it. Actually, you're a bit of a special case, really, because of all of this, your story. How you kind of blew up as a bit of a personality, and then obviously your online influence that's continued. You've been through that from a young age, really, from 19 to now 24. Was it 25? Yeah, 24. How have you dealt with the online hate in the current circumstance that there aren't really any protections? Anybody can go online. How have you managed to cope with that?
To be honest, when I first kind of blew up online, I used to really get affected by the hate comments. I used to take them really personally. I'd get a lot of appearance related kind of comments, which funny enough, well, quite often from women, which I thought was an interesting observation. But then I could kind of deal with those to an extent, but then there were some really nasty ones, like death threats.
Really?
Like saying that they were going to set my house on fire with my family inside. And there was a point where...
How do you deal with that?
Yeah, there was a point where, to be honest, I just had to take a break from social media, and I'm glad I did it. And I kind of needed to make a decision. Do I want to carry on feeling like this? Maybe I need to quit social media because I don't want to feel so upset, and also scared for my safety at some point. But then I actually thought, I'm not going to let these people win. They're sad people online that would never say this to my face, so I'm just going to ignore it. And now if I get a hate comment, if I get a really bad one, I'll block and report it, one that's inciting violence. But
does anything tend to be done with that when you report it, or does it tend to come back that this hasn't actually offended the terms of...
Yeah, no, to be fair, I tend to only really report the ones that are genuinely like death threats or something.
And do you tend to find that action is taken on those ones?
To be fair, I haven't had a death threat in a while.
That's good.
Which is good.
It's good to hear, Emily.
I'd say quite a few years now, gone death threat free.
Day like 7 or something.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, I think the ones that I did report did get removed.
Oh, good.
But yeah, I definitely used to get affected by it, but I've kind of changed my mindset. I mean,
is that just you've toughened up to it? You've just kind of grown a thicker skin, or... Exactly.
And I've kind of remembered that, these people must be going through a pretty bad time themselves to say such awful things about somebody else.
Sad that you have to feel like you've got to grow such a thick skin and
have
that kind of reflection and come offline and kind of take a moment. That it's not a place anybody really needs to be.
No, for sure. But I kind of feel like everything possible that's been said to me has been said to me at this point. So nothing worse can be said. But there was also a moment where I know I said I haven't had any negative reactions in person. That is a slight lie, because one time somebody did come over to me in a bar and say, "You're a Tory," and then throw a drink over me.
Really?
So at that point, that
just
was when
a random
I was like,
person.
Yeah, just a random person. So at that point, that's when I took a break. But apart from that, everyone in person is really, really nice. But I've just kind of got used to the hate, and I know that's a bit sad, but there wasn't kind of like a magic potion that fixed it all. I just don't get affected by it anymore. So
and with the death threats that you got, did you report them to the police?
No, I should have, but I just was convinced that they wouldn't be taken seriously. I did report the girl that threw a drink over me, because it was just a few weeks before that had happened. Nigel Farage had his first milkshake incident when someone threw a milkshake over him, which wasn't me, because I know in the most recent case
I remember seeing that. That was bizarre, wasn't it?
That was bizarre.
Just in the election in Clacton.
Yeah.
All of a sudden it was like, oh, Emily's done it, and I remember seeing that tweet and thinking, I'm fairly certain Emily's Tory.
Yeah.
I don't know why she'd all... I've also faced a big Brexiteer. I'm not really sure. She's gone on such a journey that she now hates Nigel Farage.
But then people were telling it that it was a conspiracy and that Nigel asked me to do it. They found a photo of me and Nigel, and people were saying that Nigel had asked me to do it because it makes him look better if it gets him like some good press attention if he gets milkshake. So he'd asked me to do it. And hopefully no one would notice it was me.
Where did that come from?
It was ridiculous.
Like, do you know where that thing came from?
Just some like left-wing Facebook page. Like, found a photo of me and Nigel and put it against the girl that through the milkshake, but if you even looked for longer than a second at the photo, she doesn't look like me at all. Yeah. She's just got blonde hair.
So what happened when you reported the girl to the police? Did anything happen?
Basically, they were like, it made me feel so stupid for reporting it, which is quite funny because now they're investigating tweets and whatnot. But they basically said, do you not think this is a waste of taxpayers' time? That's what I got told. And I said,
really?
And I said,
was this in London? Or?
This was in Northamptonshire. And I said, oh, but Nigel literally got milkshaked and, you know, the person's been prosecuted for it. Like, surely everyone's equal under the law. And then they said, well, you're not Nigel Farage, are you?
Right.
Which now, seeing how, and fair enough, like maybe it wasn't an insult or whatever, even though it was when it happened to Nigel, but regardless, I took it on the chin. But now seeing how the police are behaving in terms of,
I mean, all people are equal under the law, right?
Exactly.
Well, because you're a celebrity, you're supposed to get more protection by the police.
Yeah, exactly, which I thought was quite bizarre. And now, obviously, seeing police kind of investigate and go so hard on these tweets, is that not a waste of taxpayer money and time, like what they did with Alison Pearson recently? Is that not a waste of, do you know what I mean? It kind of seems a bit double standards.
Well, you see it, don't you? You get people calling people paedophiles online and getting themselves arrested and fined or going to prison, and then you've got actual paedophiles who've committed sexual assaults against children who don't go to prison.
I know.
It's kind of like, well,
it's honestly disgusting, but yeah.
So just going back again as well, so you go back to 19, you asked your question on Brexit. How does a 19-year-old girl from Northampton become such a raving Brexiteer? What was it about Brexit that wanted you to be so vocal in support of it? So
I always supported Brexit because I believed I believed in Britain. I've always been very patriotic, and I really thought that being in the EU did not benefit the average person in Britain. Like, people, I just don't believe that people in Sunderland got any benefit from the EU. And I also just think there's a point about sovereignty. At the end of the day, we elect our Prime Minister, and he should be, well, we elect politicians that then elect a Prime Minister, technically speaking. But I just think that at the end of the day, our Parliament should be sovereign. But what really got me angry is when people were trying to overturn the vote. That's when I really got involved, and I thought, I can't just, sit by and be silent on this, because, the basic principle of living in a democracy, if something gets voted for, then that has to be accepted. I sadly accepted that Keir Starmer won.
Yeah.
Didn't really like that, but, that is the nature of a democracy. You're not always going to agree with the decisions of the majority. So when they were trying to overturn it, I just thought, this is an absolute sham, and it made me so angry. So that's kind of where that got built up, and my kind of real fire for Brexit started.
Is that the same Keir Starmer who said we didn't know what we were voting for in Brexit and needed a second referendum?
Exactly, that is the same Keir Starmer.
It's interesting because at the time of recording this, obviously there's a bit of a media story about the 2.5 million petition now so far that everybody's calling for a new general election. And I think the other day Keir Starmer came out and said that, well, I'm not surprised people want a rerun of the election, but that's not how democracy works. It's kind of like, do we appreciate the hypocrisy in this, Keir? Do we recognise that the people have spoken and it has to be implemented, or do we have a second referendum and do we have a second general election because people regret the decision or didn't understand what they were buying? Because I would certainly make an argument that the general public did not know what they were buying when it came to a Labour government.
Yeah, I was about to say, it is quite an interesting one, because do they actually have a mandate for what a lot of the things they're doing? Not really. They didn't say it in their manifesto. So that definitely makes it interesting. But with Brexit, it was pretty clean.
Do you find that with friends? Again, your peer group, do you find those people that voted Labour do regret it or are frustrated? Or do you think that they're happy with things as the way they are at the moment?
To be honest, the people that did vote, if I'm being completely honest, most of my friends don't vote.
Do they not?
No,
okay.
They don't see how their vote impact. I've tried to get on them, but they just don't see how their vote will make a difference, especially the ones that kind of live in constituencies where it's like really safe seats either way. But the ones that did, it wasn't because of they were inspired by Keir Starmer or there was any policies that stood out. it was just because they felt like that we needed a bit of a change. And I think we could all agree with that, but my argument would be that maybe a change would come with a new Conservative leader.
Yeah.
Rather than
And
that.
change doesn't necessarily always mean change for the better.
No. So,
As we're sadly seeing.
Yeah, we've got a lot of buyer's remorse, don't we?
So on Brexit, obviously you were vocal. Brexit's now got Brexit done. Boris did that for us. Hurrah, Boris. Looking back now, we're 3-4 years on from actually having Brexited. No, 4 years on ish. I'll get my maths wrong. Nearly 5 years on. Sorry. Do you think it's been a success? That sigh suggests it's not a yes.
I don't think it's reached its potential, and obviously you have to factor in that a lot of people voted for Brexit because they were sick of immigration, and the Tories have made a terrible job about kind of using the benefits of Brexit in order to curb that. So I can completely understand why people are so frustrated on that issue because the Conservatives have failed. I think it still can be a success, and I always said to people that there might be some short-term kind of negative side effects, but also the long-term impacts will always be good. So I have no regrets about Brexit, and I think it still can be made a success. It's just a shame we've now got a Labour government who at its core are Remainers, so I worry what that might mean for our relationship with the EU and maybe potential closer ties. So yeah, I'm still feeling positive. I don't regret it, and regardless, it's what the British people wanted, and I believe still want. I think just we haven't seen the full benefit.
You'd still vote Brexit today?
100%.
Excellent. That's
100%.
what we like. Principles, you see.
Of course. No regrets. And I think that, hopefully with a bit of influence from reform, we can actually kind of make it a bit more of a stronger Brexit.
Well, that was one of the things I was come on to as well, Emily, in that you've also been quite recently pretty vocal on your views on reform and how they're doing and how that relates to the Conservative Party. Do you just want to explain to listeners what your views are on that? How do you think reform are doing, and what do you think the Conservative Party needs to do about it?
So I think the reform have done really well. They've kind of pitched themselves as an alternative to Labour, but also an alternative to Conservatives. Where the Conservatives have gone wrong, they've kind of, honed in on that. And there was a point where after Rishi Sunak and the whole not attending the D-Day events, there was a point where I actually wrote out my resignation letter to the Conservative Party. I was going to resign my membership and join reform. But actually, I think us kind of real small C Conservatives need to stick together and fight from within, because I'm not in the wrong party. I'm a Conservative in the Conservative Party. It's just the simple fact that the Conservatives recently haven't been that Conservative. But in terms of reform, I think they've done really well. They've branded themselves really well, and they've got a lot of young people kind of inspired in politics, to be honest, which is actually great to see.
How do you think they've done that?
I think they're really good on TikTok, and I think the fact that Nigel Farage is quite likeable. He's one of those politicians that could probably walk into any pub throughout the country and someone would buy him a pint.
Why do you think they're good on TikTok? I mean, I'm on TikTok, as in I have TikTok. I'm also very aware that it's a weird thing for a politician to go on TikTok because it can be really cringy when it's done badly.
Yeah,
and I watch some of the reform stuff, and I do think they're doing it better than everybody else, but it does also still feel like a really amateur way of the way the Americans do it. And the Americans, like if you look at the Republicans, for instance, in the election, their whole social media game was incredible. Particularly the TikTok stuff, but actually across the board. Yeah. It feels like the UK is like a million miles away from where we need to be on that side of things.
Yeah, I think there is a bit of catching up to do, because I think you're right. And we saw at the recent US election that TikTok and social media was done really, really well. I think the problem I have, especially with the Conservatives, I think they're the worst at the whole social media game.
Really?
You can almost tell when they're trying to do tweets towards young people, you can almost tell that it's clearly someone from that's 40 has wrote this, and it's just they're trying to be down with the kids, and it's just not really working. And like you said, it does just come across as a bit cringe.
To do that on social media, to do social media properly these days, you've got to be quite zeitgeisty. You've got to know, to be fair, what the memes are of the minute. And what's incredible about particularly TikTok, memes are so quick. It used to be that
So
a meme
fast.
would be around for like a couple of months.
Yeah.
You know,
yeah.
even at the early days of TikTok, you know, when really people were adopting it, kind of early lockdown, you'd see all these ridiculous memes and dances and stuff, and it would go on. Each one would last like a month or two.
Yeah.
Whereas it feels like now that's all sped up, and a
It's
meme
like
will
3
literally
days,
last
yeah.
2 or 3 days, and you've got to kind of catch it. Otherwise, don't bother. What you don't want to do is do a meme that was kind of cool 2 weeks ago, because otherwise just doing that is a bit uncool.
And I have seen the Tories are guilty of that.
Yeah,
I
yeah,
have seen
absolutely,
it.
yeah.
But it's almost like you can tell that I'm sure in order to get something out from the Conservative account, it has to go through multiple people, multiple approvals.
Yeah,
And
but I suppose that's
it's-
about having the right people in the right place, and it's about having a team of people that, you know...
No, I can understand why I do it, but when memes are so quickly
Yeah.
adapting, it kind of just makes you constantly on the back foot. So it looks like, oh, we finally,
we figured
finally
this
know
out.
what's
Yeah,
cool.
yeah.
And it's like, we were literally
It's like,
doing
my
that.
kid showed me this meme from 3 weeks ago, let's use that.
Exactly. That's just kind of how it comes across. So yeah, but I agree. I think really British politics as a whole could get a lot better, because we saw like Labour and Lib Dem doing meme wars, and that was kind of cringe.
So what would you do differently? If you were in charge of the Conservative social media account, what would you do?
I think you actually need to get for starters, it would be good, because I think you need to have like young people. If you're trying to attract young people, you need to have young people kind of in charge of that. I think the process of getting out stuff needs to be a lot quicker. And I think also the Conservative brand isn't actually that like cringe and funny. Like, we don't actually need to like try and go so over the top. We can kind of just be more authentic and kind of be more sensible. And even though it's tempting to try and be funny, if it's not funny, it's just really, really cringe. So I think actually we don't need to get involved in what Labour and Lib Dems are doing. We can actually just like have quite like a more professional kind of serious social media, because that's kind of like what the Conservative brand is.
I mean, there's also, I think, a difference between being funny and having fun with it.
Yeah, exactly.
That's the thing. I mean,
Exactly.
it's about understanding what social media is, and if you over-corporatise it, then it's just dead on arrival, right?
Yeah.
But trying to force something to be funny that isn't organic, particularly on social media, it's like people just don't buy that, because the authenticity is the key point.
Yeah.
But even as a Conservative Party, you're right. You know, people expect certain standards and all this kind of stuff of a party or even a politician. But you can still have fun with it.
No, exactly. And I think that's something that Rishi Sunak got wrong. Like, I would have liked to see his personality a lot more.
To be fair, Farage did pretty well.
Yeah.
I mean, again, it was a bit amateurish, but you gave him credit for it. Like, there was, when he decided to stand in Clacton, and there was the whole like Eminem Guess Who's Back kind of thing on TikTok, and you're like, you know what? I'm not going to say that's cringy. It's not great, but you know what? It's a fair,
kind of fun.
It's a fair effort.
Yeah.
You're having a bit of fun. You're not taking yourself too seriously, but you kind of need that element, because
But
people.
Boris was great at it.
Exactly that.
Like that
Exactly
blue
that.
passport.
Yeah,
Brilliant.
blue.
Love that video. Everyone talks about that.
That's still, to be fair, that's still a gif on my phone on WhatsApp. It's just like said it blue.
No, exactly. And like all my friends always talk about like whenever like I just went travelling recently and I had my passport, and every time my friend would see it, they'd be like blue.
Yeah,
Like, do you know what I mean?
absolutely.
Like Boris was great at it, and I think having a personality spearheading your party is actually really helpful and really good.
And I've said this before to people that, people would say, well, why would anybody on Teesside vote for Boris? Like, how can they ever relate to him? It's like, well, they don't need somebody who looks and sounds like them to vote for them. They want people who are authentic.
So it's such a condescending thing to say.
Exactly. It's like we just want people to listen to us, understand our concerns, and address those concerns. Just because Boris is what he is, what people liked about Boris, whether you were from Middlesbrough, Kent, or Manchester, you liked him because he was authentic. And again, there was an element that you didn't take himself too seriously, and he made mistakes and he bumbled a bit, but that was part of the authenticity that people just liked, right? And sometimes I think that's one of the reasons people like Donald Trump. People don't, he doesn't. Does Donald Trump phrase things in the right way all the time? Obviously not. Does he say ridiculous things sometimes? Absolutely. But if you take him in context for what he is, people kind of get it.
Yeah, exactly.
Whereas we try too hard to be like, everything needs to be in the right place at the right time, and it's kind of. And I find this actually with social media actively dislikes it. We've done, we've done loads of testing on my social media stuff. If I was to go and get a camera and stand in front of camera and do a very kind of pose, kind of almost kind of like headshot political piece to camera, it would look really smart and it would have like cutaways and it'd all be great. But the engagement on that actually dies on its backside compared to me literally just whacking out my phone and doing a selfie video being like, this has just happened, this is what I think. The engagement on that and how people respond to that is worlds apart. And it's even little things like that that I think, there needs to be a step change as to Yeah, right. Who we're putting in charge of that as a party?
Yeah. To be fair, I think Robert Jenrick did some quite good pieces to camera recently. But what they did with the videos is they made it really engaging, lots of overlays. So like you said, you can kind of like, have fun with things and, like add in a few different elements to make it more engaging and more interesting without having to, go to like Labour and Lib Dem and look at the memes that they're doing. Oh, they're having a meme war, let's get involved.
Ed Davey thing at the minute, which is weird, where he keeps standing outside Parliament and challenging Keir Starmer to a game of FIFA.
Yeah,
like, what is that about? It's like, we need to do something on TikTok, and FIFA's like down with the kids, and you're like, what are you doing?
But I just don't think the Conservatives need to get involved with that. Like you said, I think it's great to have personalities within our party. Because I think, like I said, Boris was great at that. People think of him on the zip line. What do you think of when you think of Rishi Sunak? I can't really think of any, funny moments or any kind of like iconic moments, apart from when, unfortunately, he was announcing the snap election and someone forgot to provide him with an umbrella.
Yeah, no, that wasn't ideal, was it?
No, it was not.
But with you speak pretty positively about reform and support for reform. You touched upon it a little bit, but just expand a bit further. What's keeping you in the Conservative Party?
I think it's kind of stubbornness from me, to be honest, because like I
refusing to accept that you were wrong or something. Yeah.
No, but I refused because at the end of the day, like the clue is in the name. It is the Conservative Party, and I am a Conservative. If anything, it's kind of the more what should we say, like liberal types that are in the wrong party, in my opinion. They belong in the Lib Dem. So I'm in the right party, so I'm going to try. I'm going to give it one last push to make the Conservative Party more conservative. I think Kemi is actually quite conservative, so I think that's kind of a big tick for starters. But I refuse to like give up on my party. Like I've been a member since I was 16. It's really sad to like walk away from something that effectively has been a huge part of your life. Yeah. I know to people that aren't interested in politics, that sounds ridiculous. But if you're involved in politics, if you know, you know.
Yeah, absolutely.
So it is kind of sad. But the pragmatist in me, and I do have a soft spot for reform, would like to see them do a little electoral pact at the next election.
So do you think Farage is in the wrong party? Should he be in the Conservative Party?
Well, Farage is a Conservative, so probably yes, he was traditionally. Yeah. But then again, some reform kind of policies aren't necessarily that Conservative because reform kind of have an interesting kind of demographic that they try to appeal to, because they try and appeal on the kind of traditional Labour supporters as well as the kind of like disgruntled Tories. So they have to be a bit more careful. But to be honest, yeah, I think Farage does by definition belong in the Conservative Party, but I can see with why he's obviously not going to do that, especially as his big like shtick is immigration, and the Conservatives have got that so badly wrong, and so many people feel that they've failed on that issue and failed them.
So why do you think it's a good idea to have an electoral pact, given that we've had a reform party that's stated goal at the minute is to try and destroy the Conservative Party?
Yeah, but that's all well and good, but I think even the Conservatives can admit now, after we've seen this absolute clown show from Keir Starmer, that some sort of kind of working with the Conservative, like even a Rishi Sunak government, was better than what we currently have. So I think we just have to be adults about it. We have to be pragmatic, and unless we just want infinite years of Labour rule, I think the sensible thing to do would be for the Conservatives to stand down a few candidates in seats where they're not going to win, but reform actually have a chance, and vice versa. And then we can, work together and stop Keir Starmer having another term in office and ruining our country even more.
Well, people said this back in 2014 with UKIP when they won the European elections. Literally came top. Most most MEPs beat Tories and Labour. And everyone was talking about, we need to do a deal or something needs to give. But actually, if we get our act together and we're true to ourselves and we're able to offer a positive vision for the country that the country feels like we can deliver, we've been able to show that we can stave off the need to do anything like that and stick true to our principles rather than compromise. I agree.
It does feel slightly different, though. It feels like Reform are a slightly more serious party than UKIP.
Why do you say that?
Number one, I think UKIP had quite a few kind of like controversies, whereas Reform, because they've started fresh, they're kind of don't have kind of the kind of skeletons in the closet so much. But also, they did win 4 seats, or 5 seats even. Was it 5 or 4? Five, yeah. It was like they won 5 seats, so we do have to take the threats quite seriously. And if you look at any polls, they're still polling well above 10% in most polls. And if you just add the Conservative and I know that this isn't actually how it works, but you just imagine this picture where you kind of it's just not even comparable to the Labour vote. If you just kind of put them together, then the chances of a Labour government are just so small.
But if you were to play devil's advocate, again, you compare back to 2014, you would say actually a big chunk of that reform vote is a frustrated anti-politics kind of protest vote that doesn't want to vote Labour, still blames us for the last kind of 3 or 4 years and all that kind of stuff. And so is looking for an alternative. But actually, if there was a real alternative from a Conservative Party, that a lot of that vote would come back to us in the same way it did in 2015.
And look, there's not going to be an election, even though we've got that nice petition, there's not going to be an election for another 4 or 5 years. So
it's a bold prediction.
We can, you never know.
Back over the last 5 years, who knows what's going to happen?
Fingers crossed. That would be lovely. But I think, we can assess it and we can see what the situation is like. But I think how things currently stand, I don't see a way forward without that kind of electoral pact.
So just before we come to an end, just to move on a little bit, I mean, we talked about you being a political influencer. I mean, I got off that offline. I'm not entirely sure what that means. But you are certainly a social media personality within the Conservative sphere and actually the wider political sphere, so I think it's a justified title. But you also have been involved more directly in politics in that you I think you were a staffer for was it 5 or 6 days or something? Was it? What happened?
It was
there?
8 days.
Was it 8 days? Sorry.
No. So I was working. After university, I studied politics and religion. Nothing too controversial. I went and I kind of did the traditional thing that most people do and went in a grad scheme. Worked in the city.
Oh, did you? Who was that with?
EY.
Oh right.
Wow. So as a business consultant within finance. So a bit not that expected. Maybe people were probably expecting me to jump straight into politics, but I decided I kind of wanted to give another career a go first.
Absolutely.
And it was great. I had some great opportunities, but I just felt this constant longing to be in the thick of politics. I just love it. It's my passion. So
did you finish the
so it was a year and a half in, but obviously I knew that there was going to be a general election this year.
Yeah.
Granted, I thought it was going to be November, so I kind of thought, whilst the Conservative jobs are in abundance, it's probably a good time that if I want to work in Parliament, this might be my last kind of chance to get my foot in the door. So yeah, I got an amazing job with an amazing boss. I was working for Jane Stevenson as her press officer, so I was dealing with journalists, which is kind of stuff I've done in the past.
Yep.
And that was another thing at EY. I had to be quite careful about what I was tweeting, what I was saying, kind of the TV and the things that I was doing. So that was another reason I kind of missed all of that. So I was working in Parliament, was loving it, and then 8 days in, a rumour starts to go around that Rishi might be calling it, and I thought surely not, because it didn't make any sense really at the time.
I remember being at dinner the night before in London actually with some friends, and I can't remember how it came up. We were talking, oh well, tomorrow's really the last day that we have to worry about him calling an election. And I turned to him and I was like, what are you talking about? I guarantee you there's no way he's calling an election tomorrow. Exactly. Why would he possibly do that? And I'm like, heard some rumours, hope they're not true, we'll have to wait and see.
It was awful. I was just thinking surely not, but then the rumours just kind of intensified. It was being reported on Sky, BBC, ITV. The rush around Portcullis House was very exciting. You could hear all the whispers and whatnot.
Well, that night before, it was the night before, a couple of the journalists started to ask the question, and Number 10 and TCHQ just went dark. Yeah. And that's the point at which the journalists get all excited because oh, hang on. Yeah. They're not responding, something's going on, and then all of a sudden it just takes off, doesn't it?
No, exactly. And I think even that day it was PMQs or something, and
it was,
they asked a question is it true, and he didn't even deny it. So I was just but I was still kind of being a bit delusional at that point, holding on to hope that I might still have a job until November, but then obviously it turned out not. So it kind of went into election mode, which, to be honest, it was a great experience. I have no regrets kind of leaving EY. And
so you're fully involved in the election campaign as well?
Well, it's a bit. If you're a staffer, you kind of like have to do time in lieu. So I was like during my weekends and my free time, I really put in a lot of effort. But yeah, no, it's sad really, because the boss I was waiting for, Jane Stevens, she was a great local MP, but she was just a victim of the wider party, and it's one of those seats where they don't really want Labour, but the Brexit Party and Conservative vote split. If only they had an electoral pact then.
Well, I mean, you say that. I mean, Simon Clarke, who was the MP in Middlesbrough South and East Cleveland in my patch, didn't have a Reform candidate.
No.
And he lost by 100 votes. And we actually think, I think Simon agrees with this, that had he had a Reform candidate, he would have probably won the seat.
Yeah, there is a few cases. So, I would just say a general
I don't disagree with the principle. But
there are a
few interesting nuances to it. But, I mean, 8 days doesn't feel very long, Emily. So are you going to go... Is the plan, do you want to go and work for another MP? Do you want to get back involved in a more formal way? Or is it back to social media, TV personality?
Well, I've just been travelling in Australia and Fiji, which was a great opportunity.
Were there any rumours about you going, and I'm a celebrity? Is that why you're out there? No. Emily's gone out to Australia.
I don't think I'd be very good
in the airport.
Challenges. I literally saw a snake in Australia and I literally thought I was going to pass out. I was so scared. So not really sure that's my forte.
I think you do well in I'm a Celebrity, actually. Maybe for next season.
Yeah.
If anybody's listening from ITV, Ant and Dec.
So yeah, I'm kind of deciding, kind of took that time away, because it was always my plan to go travelling after the general election if the MP I was working for didn't keep her seat. Obviously was thinking that would be more like January time, but you got to keep these things moving. So yeah, I'm kind of at a point now where I'm just kind of working out what I want to do next, keeping my options open and not in too much of a rush, but obviously definitely keen to do something politics or press media related. Because that like I've tried working in a job that's not related, and I just have this yearning to get involved. If
you've got the political bug, it's very difficult to go and do something else.
It's so hard. There's just like an adrenaline rush that you can't get anywhere else.
No, there is. And people who aren't interested in politics who might stumble across this will think that's just bonkers, but there is something. If it bites you, unfortunately you're inflicted with it forever. It doesn't go away.
Exactly. So yeah, we'll see.
And then just as we come towards the end, we've obviously had the leadership contest. I think you also had a kind of another hiccup, Emily. I actually remember seeing this as well. I think you popped up on my Twitter feed I think you were stood in Pretty's office having endorsed Pretty for the leadership, and then the next day, unfortunately, she was eliminated from the contest. Yeah,
less than 24 hours later. Yeah. So yeah, it's been a bit of a weird year for things like that.
Well, what was it about Pretty though? Why did you want to back Pretty for the leadership?
Yeah, I've always liked Pretty, and when I first started out in politics, and this is something I always remember, she was so kind to me. She really kind of took me under her wing.
Yeah, she's a great conservative like that for the grassroots and just with working with people. She's brilliant.
Exactly, and that was another thing. Her vision for the grassroots was really, really positive, and I just kind of had a few different choices in mind, and I kind of listened to the different speeches, and I actually found most inspired by her. And people were quite shocked because they were like, oh, she got immigration so wrong, but actually you have to put that into context, because that was a pretty difficult time. There was various things that happened that kind of inflated those numbers, but still I actually do think at core she genuinely was serious about reducing immigration. So I think had she become leader, that would have been a priority, and I trusted her with that. So yeah, I kind of went with Pretty. Obviously, she got eliminated 24 hours later. The thing is, though, with me, I will never back the candidate just because I think they're going to win. And I know a lot of people do it.
Yeah, they do.
Because, they want jobs or whatever. But I will never be that person. I'm too principled. So even though I knew that there was a chance that she might not even make it to the top two, I just thought, actually, I'm gonna go with who I think. And then I was between Rob and Kemi. Yeah. And I was like, I'll just make a decision based on which one doesn't make it to the final two. Obviously, they both ended up making it, so I thought, here we go. And I really took my time with this, because they both have strengths and they both have weaknesses. I mean, you're never going to get your perfect leader anyway, but to be honest, I was happy with either. I did end up going for Rob, and we all know how that ended. Exactly, we all know how that ended, but yeah, no, I'm feeling really inspired with Kemi. And one thing I always said about Kemi, I think we're starting to see that now, is that she will give Keir Starmer a grilling at PMQs.
Yeah, it's a slightly cheeky question, but you went for Pretty, you went for Jenrick. What was wrong with Kemi? Why was it always somebody else instead of Kemi at the time? I don't mean that in a negative way.
No, of course not. I think number one, because she was a minister, she was quite involved in the last government, and I thought the last government was a disaster, although you could argue she might have been trying to fight from within. We don't know what the conversations were behind closed doors. I think secondly, she can come across, because her style is so direct, like, I worry in an election would she come across likeable enough. But actually I think the more I see of her, the more I'm kind of like, okay, yes, she's a direct person, that has benefits too, but she is trying to, like, you know, come across as quite a bit more warm, and I think that's just something that I quite like from a politician. I like a politician to be likeable, and I am definitely seeing that. So yeah, I'm feeling positive about it, even though the two choices that I went for didn't end up becoming leader. I'm still feeling really positive, and I think so far so good. So far so good. Yeah, and I think another thing is she didn't really commit to a lot, but then again, you could argue that other candidates were over-promising. Like Rob Jamrick, like, made his position on a lot of things very clear, whereas Kemi, but maybe that's more a sensible approach. It's kind of hard to say.
Well, I mean, to be fair, I could see benefits to both approaches. Again, if you look at Kemi, you look at yourself and you look at your friendship group, maybe you look at people in your wider peer group, how do you think Kemi's going to come across?
I think she says a lot of things that are quite common sense, that I think, you know, those people that I was saying that are quite socially conservative, I think that will resonate with them. I think it also I think it's quite inspiring as well how she doesn't want to be seen as, like, the first, like, black leader. She's kind of very, like, I don't want to be defined by my skin colour, and I think that's quite inspiring as well. So yeah, I think that, you know, it does show that the Conservative Party is more modern, and that, you know, when people try and say all these things about the Conservative Party, at the end of the day, we've got, like, a really strong female as leader now. So I think it is good, you know, for the party's
young people image. Will give her a hearing? Because it's difficult for a Conservative leader to get a hearing with, you know, anybody under the age of 30, basically, isn't it?
It always will be, but, you know, like, I hope so, and that's something that I'm going to try and, you know, promote, that we should give people a chance. Like, I even gave Keir Starmer's government a chance. I mean, it didn't last very long because it just went wrong so quickly, but I think it is important to, you know, like, go in with an open mind, so hopefully they do.
I think you also make a really interesting point, and we're seeing it a bit. I mean, I'm not saying that everybody's doing it, but there is a shift towards reform from younger people that we've not seen happen to the Conservative Party before, and there's, you know, that might be due to lots of different reasons. It might be a blip, but I can certainly say anecdotally, it does feel to me like kids these days, I would say certainly from kind of 14, 15 years and onwards, there does seem to be a generation of young people who are more conservative than previous young generations.
Honestly, like, millennials are quite woke traditionally, but I actually think that my generation is starting to push back against kind of the woke agenda.
There is definitely a theme of it, isn't it? There's a strand going through lots of, not everybody, but a significant number of young people that is much more traditional. Lots of people don't smoke, very few people drink. There's kind of things happening. It's almost like, and again, this is an overstatement, but there is that kind of thing of whatever the zeitgeist is in politics, it's like the alternative is the counterculture, and it kind of feels like there may be, depending on what reform the Conservatives do, if they can get their act together, almost become the counterculture for that younger generation.
No, absolutely. And I think, like, I know the word woke is a bit of an annoying word because it can mean so many different things.
It only knows the wokies, though.
Exactly. But yeah, kind of there is definitely a pushback, because I think things have gone way too far. Like, we've kind of gone with people, like, genuinely, like, questioning their gender to, like, people identifying as, you know, like, animals and things, and I think it's just been a bit.
Well, it's bizarre. I mean, as of recording today, so I mean, this was recorded a couple of weeks ago, but as of recording today, there's the Supreme Court are passing judgment to decide what is a woman. I mean, the fact that the highest court in the land has to take a legal judgment on what a woman is.
Do they need a science textbook or something?
It's just bizarre, isn't it, how far we've come in our modern world. And I think there is a bit of a pushback. I think there is a reset. I actually think what's happened in America will start to feed across here as well. So hopefully we can get some common sense back into everyday life.
It's just the Keir Starmer government, it just feels like such bad timing, because I felt like something was happening, and then it's just like, we just got to deal with this.
Well, I mean, I was saying something to somebody the other day that says that, I mean, nobody wants to kind of have to put the country through this. It's one of the reasons I'm a Conservative, because I think the Labour Party and Labour governments always put country through bad times, but it's almost like I think there'll be a really interesting space
in the next few years, because of how badly the Labour government are going to do, that Conservative values are going to be given much more of a hearing and a space than if we tried to make that same argument today or 6 months ago. It almost kind of feels like we need to go through this period of time to help relearn some of the lessons of the past.
Yeah, I do completely agree with that. The only thing is, like, what if we get to a point where...
What does it do for the country in the meantime?
Exactly. Like, are these decisions even going to be reversible? It's kind of scary. But I do agree. It's I think people forget when there hasn't been a Labour government for a while, kind of how bad they are. And especially when the Conservatives have been in power for so long, people kind of forget, that Labour are worse. So it's always good that people are having a reminder and waking up and smelling the coffee that Keir Starmer is not the knight in...
It's that whole, like, you feel a bit, you feel smug by saying I told you so, but at the end of the day, prices are still going up and taxes are going up, and it's just... So if you were to project forward, crystal ball gaze, where do you think the country's going to be politically at the next general election? What do you think is going to happen? It's too early to predict, right? But if you had to guess, where do you think we're going to be?
Of course. Well, the first thing I'd say on that is that even though Labour do have a sizable majority, so many of them are seats that they won only just their majorities in each seat are quite small, which means that it can be easily overturned.
It's optimism,
which is
we love it.
Great news. But I think how things currently stand, there would need to be some sort of concessions from Reform and from the Conservatives in order to kind of make it work and make sure that we prevent another Keir Starmer government. But honestly, I'm feeling pretty positive, because I think people, like you said, are seeing that Labour are not the quick fix to their problems. In fact, they might even make them worse. I don't think they can be trusted. Just think about how, Lib Dems promised to cut tuition fees. People hadn't forgotten about that. People do have a short memory sometimes, but when they're lied to so explicitly, I think people that ignites a new kind of anger in them. So I'm feeling pretty positive. I don't think Labour will get a majority at the next election. Saying it now.
And in 5 years' time, might be Emily Hewertson MP. Or
you never know. Watch this space.
Future Prime Minister.
Watch this space. I'll invite you around for tea at number 10.
I'll be there. I'll be there, Emily. You've said it now. I'll hold you to it. Well, it's been an absolute pleasure, Emily. Thanks for coming on. I've found it really, really interesting, and hopefully we'll get you back on, in the future and see how well these predictions have gone.
Amazing. Thank you.
Thanks for your time.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for listening to the Blueprint podcast, brought to you by Conservative Home with me, Ben Hewertson. Remember, you can like and subscribe on all of our social media channels, and you can catch a new episode every single Wednesday wherever you get your usual podcasts from.